We are approaching 3 years since Jon Jones' last fight. 3 years since his last fight. His last fight was in February of 2020, right before, obviously, the pandemic hit here in America. That was in March. 3 years. That's amazing to me. Like, I can't believe 3 years has gone by so fast. He wants to fight at heavyweight. I'm told that he's in for that date. Now, the fight that they want is him versus Francis Ngannou. I don't think Francis is going to be available by December 10th. I don't think they'll get a deal done with him. I don't think he'll be 100% healthy after the knee surgery by December 10th. I do feel more and more confident that they are going to get a deal done with him, in large part due to the fact that, A, he's not with CAA anymore, and that was a big point of contention because Endeavor CAA aren't the best of friends, but also there aren't a ton of options out there outside of the UFC. Is there a one-off here or there? Sure, but there's no Jake Paul fight like Nate Diaz has. That was Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury unavailable right now, and when I spoke to him in Cardiff, didn't seem all that keen on the fight, at least as much as he was back in April. And so I think he ultimately does resign. I don't think he's able to fight in December. So their plan B is, hey, we got Jon ready to go. You got to strike when that iron is hot. Let's do Jon versus Stipe. There aren't a lot of fights that will get Stipe excited. He's a full-time firefighter now. Maybe this is the one. And I'm told that that's kind of moving at a snail's pace right now. But Jon, at least right now, let's see what happens when you got to put pen to paper, is down for that date. Now, can they do Stipe versus Jon on that card? I think 100%. That's a big, big fight. It doesn't have to be for a belt. It doesn't have to be for an interim. It doesn't have to be for a Vegas. Like, that's a fight. That's a pay-per-view main event. And I don't think Yuri, Glover, I don't think any of those guys would care being the co-main event. It is a little funky that Jon would be fighting on the same card as the light heavyweight title fight. But honestly, there's been so many light heavyweight title fights since then. He is so far removed from that belt at this point. He'll always be the greatest of all time in that weight class. I don't think he's like the black cloud that people might think he would have been 2 years ago had he fought on the same card as a light heavyweight title fight. They just got to figure this out soon. It's October 17th. We're talking December 10th. Now, he doesn't have to necessarily cut weight, neither would Stipe, but get in shape, prepare, all that stuff and more. I think the UFC is pretty much at the end of the road with Stipe. I don't think they have a lot of plans left for him. I think he is their plan B. And I kind of feel like he senses that. And I don't think he's coming back for any other fight other than Jon or maybe a Francis. That's it. Not a Curtis, not a Gane, not a Tuivasa. I just don't think that interests him. I think he's past that point. So my big question is, do they make it right? Like, do they, they couldn't get Jon to fight in 2020, 2021 because they couldn't figure it out financially. Can they figure this one out? Can they make it right for both parties involved? That's going to be the big hang up here. I think that if it is right, if they pay accordingly, I think they'll get this fight done. I think we'll see this fight. If we don't see this fight, there's only one reason why. It's finances, and that's unfortunate, and that's a bummer because it's a great card. I don't think the card necessarily needs it, but it ups it tremendously. And if they don't make the fight happen, I think they'll try to make the fight happen in March because we've got January Brazil, February Perth. I think they'll go to the UK in April, and then we'll go potentially March, Vegas, this fight, if they can get it done. And then I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, and this is as of right this second, if we don't see Stipe again. I see a scenario where if we don't get this fight here in December because Francis is unavailable, that we may not see Stipe again. Kind of a weird way to end the career, but it's sort of very Stipe-like. Now, is there a scenario where, they do this fight in March and then he fights the winner? Sure. The scenario I would love to see happen is they do this fight in March, winner fights Francis, International Fight Week or around that time, right? That would be great. Francis gets a big deal. He gets what he's owed. He gets to defend his title, heavyweight champ, either versus Jon or the trilogy with Stipe. Let's go. Let's make it happen. What a pay-per-view that would be, right? Yuri Glover 2, Blachowicz versus Ankalaev, Jones, Miocic, Bo Nickel, all the other names we mentioned. As of right this moment, though, it ain't done. And I think the clock is ticking. And they usually like to announce these big fights on a pay-per-view card when there's a lot of people watching. So maybe the deadline is this weekend. Now, it's an arbitrary deadline. They'll do it whenever. But usually they like to announce big fights around big fights. And so I could see this weekend being an arbitrary deadline, and I could see this week being a big week to try to make this fight happen. Jon Jones heavyweight. We got to see it. And there aren't a lot of years and months left. It would be such a shame if the last years of the great Jon Jones's career just get wasted over finances. Like, this shouldn't happen. Now, I know there haven't been, it hasn't been, rainbows and lollipops, even in the midst of all this. Remember, early pandemic, there were issues, legal issues. Mid-pandemic, at Hall of Fame, it hasn't been easy. But it seems, at least from this POV, he's in the clear. He could fight. He's motivated. He's training. He's actively training. His coaches are excited. People are optimistic. It's a new chapter, a new lease on life. And you've got a massive dream fight, if you will, with Stipe. It's not the heavyweight title fight, but by the way, it's a very, very good plan B. Let's figure this out. Let's figure this out, baby. Imagine that pay-per-view. That would be incredible. So let's see. Stay tuned. Watch this space. Maybe by Wednesday, they'll figure it out. I'd love to see it happen. Jones versus Stipe. Whew, two legends. Arguably the greatest heavyweight champion of all time versus the greatest light heavyweight champion of all time. The most decorated champion, arguably, in UFC history. He put up a graphic, 13, I think it was 13 fights for Khabib in the UFC. He had 13 title fights. In addition to all the fights before that. These youngsters have forgotten how great Jon Jones's career was. And I know it's been littered with controversies and issues and stuff like that. But man, 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15, like that run was just unlike anything. A murderer's row. He was just beating Hall of Famer after Hall of Famer after Hall of Famer after Hall of Famer. So I'd love to see it happen. We'll see if they get it done. And if not, we'll get Yuri Prochazka versus Glover Teixeira 2, rematch of potentially the fight of the year. The last 3 pay-per-views are very juicy. And again, I know I was lamenting the Apex and all that stuff, but it makes those pay-per-views feel that much more special. These last 3, then you got Brazil, then you got Australia, then you got potentially Jones, if this doesn't happen, in December. Then you got potentially Leon versus Kamaru. Like, we're looking at a nice stretch here of some tremendous pay-per-view offerings. Really, really good stuff. It's a good time to be a fan, despite all the Apex fights.